Formula One has 11 teams, but more than 24 others used to exist, and almost none of them went out the same way. In this video, you'll see what happened to every defunct Formula One team. Let's get started. Take Maserati. From 1950, they were a works constructor, and at the centre of their story is one car and one driver. The 250F is still one of the most beautiful Grand Prix cars ever built, and Vanwall won 2 world championships in it, in 1954 and again in 1957. That should be the foundation of a dynasty. Instead, it was a goodbye. Maserati had been balancing 2 businesses for years, selling customer cars to privateers while running an expensive works team for prestige. And by the end of 1957, the prestige side could no longer be subsidized. They announced their withdrawal, slid into receivership in 1958, and quietly turned their attention to building road cars instead. The 250F outlived the team that built it, which is a pattern you're going to see again and again.
Italians put into a car something of themselves and the beauty of style, and they're such lovely people.
You'll see it most clearly with Lancia, because Lancia's exit is where the inheritance motif really begins. It's May 1955. Alberto Ascari, the biggest Italian star in the sport, has just survived crashing his car straight into the harbour at Monaco. He climbs out, soaking wet, broken nose, alive. 4 days later, he straps into a Ferrari sports car for a casual test at Monza, crashes again, and this time he doesn't survive. Lancia's built him a genuinely brilliant car, the D50, designed by Vittorio Giano, with its fuel tank slung between the wheels and a compact V8 that made it quick as well as gorgeous. But the team was psychologically shattered by losing Ascari. Lancia wasn't selling enough road cars to pay for the program, and the whole Italian motor industry was in crisis after the Le Mans disaster that summer. So Gianni Lancia cancelled the project after barely 2 seasons. And here's the twist. He didn't scrap the cars. He gave them to Ferrari. Giano followed them across, and in 1956, Ferrari-run Lancias won 5 of the 7 championship races and handed Fangio the world title. Lancia's program ended, and that exit directly built Ferrari's next championship. The car that should have made Lancia immortal made a rival immortal instead.
Lancia, you don't believe that, presumably, judging by your collection, that they're a particularly brilliant maker of motor cars?
Are you mad or are you mental? Lancias only came in black and rust.
I still stand by Lancia. There's more Lancias
come
I'd
on.
like. The number of Ferraris I'd like to own now is 1.
What about the A60 Monza? What about the 750 Monza? What about the PF250? What about the...
A lot of people write and complain that this isn't a car show anymore. It is now.
Some of these early teams didn't get a quick ending like that. Some of them got overtaken by their own genius. That's Cooper. In 1958, this small British company did something that changed the entire sport. They put the engine behind the driver. Sterling Moss won in Argentina that year in a little rear-engined Cooper. And within 2 seasons, the idea had conquered everything. Cooper won back-to-back constructors' titles in 1959 and 1960, Jack Brabham took both drivers' championships, and the front-engined Grand Prix car was suddenly extinct. The problem is that once you've shown everyone the future, everyone gets to copy it. Lotus, BRM, Brabham, Ferrari, they all adapted, and several of them did the rear-engine concept better than Cooper could. Then Charles Cooper passed away, and John Cooper was badly hurt in a road accident, and a company that had just revolutionized motorsport simply couldn't fund the next step. They were sold to a holding group, scraped together a couple more wins, and quietly ended their works effort in 1968. And yet, in the only way that really counts, Cooper never truly vanished at all. Every modern F1 car still has its engine behind the driver. The entire grid is, architecturally, a Cooper.
It's so miserable, its little face. I saw one coming the other way, coming into work the other day, and it just looked so catastrophically sad. Morning, it's all over.
Then there's BRM, which is less a team than a national obsession. British Racing Motors was founded as Britain's answer to the Italians, a patriotic, committee-run project meant to prove the country could build a world-beating Grand Prix car. For years, it was a punchline. The famous V16 engine was overpromised and underdeveloped. The team was mocked, and the whole thing looked like national embarrassment dressed up as ambition. And then, finally, it worked. In 1962, Graham Hill won in Holland, Germany, Italy, and South Africa, took the Drivers' Championship, and BRM won the Constructors' title too. The only double crown in its entire history. They'd done it. They'd proved the point. But proving the point was the high watermark, and after that came the long, melancholy slide. The heavy, complicated H16 engine went nowhere. There were occasional flashes, a brilliant win at Spa, another at Monaco, but no real revival. When their backer, Sir Alfred Owen, withdrew his support and then passed away in 1974, the whole reason for the team's existence went with him. BRM went into liquidation, came back under the Stanley name, built a couple of uncompetitive cars, and faded out completely by the end of 1977. But none of these were the team with the most dramatic ending. Because the next one ended at the precise moment of its greatest triumph, and there's an argument that nobody in this entire video had it worse. It's the last race of 1958. Vanwall has just done the impossible. Tony van der Velde built this team out of pure spite. He'd been part of the BRM committee, decided a committee would never beat the Italians, and went off to build a British car that could. And it did. Vanwall won Britain's first ever World Championship Grand Prix at Silverstone in 1957. And in 1958, Moss and Tony Brooks won 3 races each, and delivered the very first Constructors Championship in the history of the sport. Vanwall was the answer to the question the entire British motor industry had been asking for a decade. And then, at that final race in Morocco, the race where the title was sealed, Vanwall's driver Stuart Lewis Evans suffered burns he would not survive. The triumph and the heartbreak arrived in the same weekend. Van der Velde, whose own health was collapsing, looked at what it had cost and announced the team would not continue. There were a few half-hearted appearances afterwards, but the real Vanwall, the first Constructors' champion ever crowned, was finished almost the instant it won. Now that's a noble ending. Founder's ambition, national pride, but the next group of teams folded for a much simpler reason. The man at the top got bored, or did the maths, or just decided he had better things to do.
I mean, yeah, it's a bit twitchy around the back end, but 6-litre V12 on the car weighs less than a ton. Come on, what do you expect?
Start with Matra, because Matra is the inheritance motif at its purest. This was a French aerospace company that went racing, and in 1969 it won everything. Jackie Stewart took 6 wins and the driver's title in a Matra chassis, run by a young team manager named Ken Tyrrell, and Matra took the Constructors' Championship. The catch was that Matra was obsessed with using its own French V12 engine, and Tyrrell wanted the proven Cosworth. That disagreement split them up. Tyrrell went off to build his own cars and become a legend. Matra's Works F1 effort limped on for another couple of seasons. never came close to the magic of 1969 and quietly disappeared at the end of 1972, so the company could focus on sports cars and, eventually, on getting out of top-level racing altogether. But the people didn't vanish. The engineers and that French V12 expertise flowed straight into a new team called Ligier. Wolf folded even faster and even stranger. A brand new team shows up for its very first race in 1977. It wins. Walter Wolf, an oil millionaire, bankrolled the whole thing, hired the right people, and Jody Scheckter won the team's debut Grand Prix in Argentina, then added Monaco and Canada and finished runner-up in the championship in year one. That is one of the greatest entrances any team has ever made. And then ground effect aerodynamics arrived. The bar shot up, Scheckter left for Ferrari, James Hunt came in, and it didn't click. And Walter Wolf, after barely 3 seasons, simply lost interest. He didn't go bankrupt, he didn't have a disaster, he just got bored of his expensive toy and sold the whole operation to the Fittipaldi brothers. Wolf proved a new team could win immediately, and then proved just as quickly that money and novelty aren't enough to keep you at the front, or even to keep the owner paying attention. Sounds quite similar to the current Aston Martin situation, doesn't it?
Lovely.
Hesketh folded the most British way imaginable. Lord Hesketh ran his team as an aristocratic 2 fingers to the establishment. Champagne, no sponsorship stickers, a teddy bear on the car, and a fast, unknown young driver called James Hunt. And it actually worked. Engineer Harvey Postlethwaite built them a proper car, and Hunt won the 1975 Dutch Grand Prix as a genuine privateer, beating the factory teams. The trouble is that "we refuse to take sponsorship money" is a fantastic personality and a terrible business plan. Once Lord Hesketh's own fortune wasn't enough, and the sponsors he'd snubbed didn't come riding to the rescue, the whole thing unravelled. The cars were sold off. Hunt left for McLaren and won the world title there, and the rump of the team faded out, failing to qualify by 1978.
Young historic racer Michael Lyons, who's so successful in this car. He's a modern GT racer as well. He's very sideways.
Then there's March, which had the least dramatic exit on this entire list. And that's the point. March wasn't really a team so much as a racing car factory that also happened to enter Formula One. They sold cars to anyone. Stewart won the 1970 Spanish Grand Prix in a customer March, and the founders, including a young Max Mosley, eventually just sat down and decided the works F1 effort wasn't worth the money compared to the rest of the business. So they pulled out in 1977, sold the F1 assets, and went off to dominate IndyCar, Formula 3000, F2 and F3 instead. March's F1 team ended, but March the company outlived plenty of teams that looked far healthier. Sometimes the smartest thing a team can do is quit while the rest of the business is still alive. Surtees was sadder because it was personal. John Surtees is still the only human being to win world championships on 2 wheels and 4, and he built his own team out of that pride. It scored solidly for a few years, peaked with a 5th in the constructors' standings, and gave decent drivers decent results. But it was constantly destabilised. A driver lost in a crash at Watkins Glen, Surtees' own health steadily deteriorating, sponsors coming and going, big accidents. By the end of 1978, the funding for the next year evaporated, and Surtees withdrew. It was the end of the old idea of the owner-driver-founder team, a champion building something with his own name on the nose. By the late 70s, that idea simply wasn't possible anymore. Shadow had more trauma packed into its short life than almost anyone. The team was founded by a genuinely mysterious American, Don Nichols, a man trailed for decades by an unproven rumour that he'd worked for the CIA, a rumour that has never been confirmed and should be treated as exactly that. On track, Shadow was real. It scored on debut, became properly dangerous in the mid-70s, and Alan Jones won the 1977 Austrian Grand Prix for them. But the human cost was severe. Peter Revson was lost in testing in 1974. Tom Price and a track marshal were both lost in a horrifying accident in South Africa in 1977. The main sponsor pulled out, and then the team was gutted from the inside when a huge chunk of its own staff walked out to start a rival team. Shadow won the resulting copyright lawsuit, but lost the actual war. It ran out of money and competitiveness and shut down in 1980. I honestly think Arrows is the great heartbreak of the F1 midfield. Born from that Shadow breakaway, the founders built their very first car in just 53 days. And the team went on to live for 24 years, one of the longest-lived independents in history, without ever winning a single championship Grand Prix. And they came so close. At the 1997 Hungarian Grand Prix, Damon Hill, a reigning world champion, drove an Arrows to the brink of an outright victory before a late mechanical problem snatched it away in the closing laps. That was the whole team in one race. Good enough to win, never quite allowed to. By 2002, the money finally ran out, mid-season. The cars stopped appearing at races, and Arrows was liquidated.
First couple of corners, you have cops, you have Beckett's. Beckett's were...
Fittipaldi was Brazil's first ever Formula One constructor. And it existed because Emerson Fittipaldi, a double world champion at the absolute peak of his powers, walked away from a top McLaren seat to drive for his own brother's team. As a piece of national and family pride, it was extraordinary. As a business plan, it was never going to survive contact with ground effect aerodynamics and proper budgets. The team scraped a few good results, even a podium, merged in Wolff's old assets just to stay alive, and folded at the end of 1982, down to a single, underfunded car.
This is Emerson Fittipaldi.
Same with the long French lineage that ran from Ligier to Prost. Ligier was the proud French team, built on Matra's refugees, with famous wins and near title runs. And when Alain Prost, four-time world champion, bought it and put his own name on it, everyone assumed his stature would carry it. It didn't. The engine deals disappointed. The cars were unreliable, the reorganizations multiplied, and by 2002, the team was insolvent, with debts around $30 million. Prost, the driver, had assumed prestige could stand in for capital. Unfortunately, it can't. But not every independent folded through slow, honest financial decline. Some of them were undone by outright crime. Larrousse should be remembered for a beautiful thing. At Suzuka in 1990, Aguri Suzuki stood on the podium as the first Japanese driver ever to do so in the World Championship, in a tiny privateer car in front of his home crowd. The team finished sixth in the constructors' standings that year. And then the FIA stripped those points away because the team had filed a false declaration about who actually designed its chassis. That's the on-track version. The off-track version is genuinely unbelievable. The team's co-founder, Didier Calmels, was imprisoned after a violent domestic case involving his wife. One of its later investors, a man named Waldorf, lost his life in an armed confrontation with police. In between, there were collapsed engine deals, court protection from creditors, unpaid suppliers, and a string of failed mergers and rescues. The team folded in 1995, and its sporting story almost disappeared behind a crime blotter.
Other big French team, Larrousse, is still seeking an engine deal, as designer Gerard Ducarouche confirmed. You must be very disappointed with Lamborghini pushing the price up like that, because you did all the hard development work.
Well, it's a bit of a bad surprise.
And then there's the biggest scandal-tainted collapse of them all, because this one belongs to an actual champion. This is the only team in history to win a world championship with its founder driving his own car. That's Brabham. Jack Brabham won the 1966 Drivers' and Constructors' titles in a car bearing his own name. Denny Hume added another title in 1967, and under the genius of designer Gordon Murray, the team became one of the most inventive in the sport. The famous fan car that was banned for being too good, pioneering refueling strategies, carbon brakes, and turbo-powered title-winning cars for Nelson Piquet in 1981 and 1983. This was royalty. Brabham actually collapsed because of who ended up owning it. After Bernie Ecclestone's era and BMW's engine withdrawal, the team was bought by a man who was arrested, then passed to new owners, and kept alive by borrowing heavily from a leasing company whose directors were later convicted of corrupt lending. By 1991 and 1992, Brabham was running old cars, barely qualifying, sometimes not qualifying at all, and when the dodgy funding collapsed, it missed races and quit mid-season. A two-time Constructors Champion and one of the most creative teams the sport ever produced didn't get an honourable sunset. It got a fraud case. The teams that came after it folded because the sport built a financial cliff and shoved the smallest cars straight off it.
The fan car could get as much downforce standing still as it could going at 180 miles an hour, which means you could get a 2G standing start and you could go around hairpin bends just as quick as you could around 150 mile an hour bend, so it had a massive advantage.
Simtek's collapse is the one you can't talk about without flinching. It was a serious engineering company, wind tunnel work, consultancy for big manufacturers, that decided to run its own F1 team on a tiny budget in 1994. And 1994 is the worst possible year that sentence could end with. During the team's debut weekend at Imola, Simtek's driver, Roland Ratzenberger, was lost in qualifying. Later that season, another driver crashed badly in Spain. Another rolled a car at Silverstone. None of those accidents alone would have closed the team, but a thinly funded operation could not absorb that much damage. By mid-1995, with debts of around $10 million, Simtek shut down. Its afterlife runs entirely through one person, Nick Worth, the man behind the team, who would resurface years later as the technical force behind another doomed project. Remember that name. It comes back.
Part of the circuit, you want to do that. Well, he's just about done it and causing more trouble.
Forti is the textbook version of getting into Formula One on the back of one wealthy driver's family money. The moment that driver left for a better team, Forti's whole financial structure was exposed. A rescue deal turned into a nightmare. The investor claimed to have bought control, The team insisted no money had actually arrived. Suppliers went unpaid, and the engine manufacturer simply stopped delivering engines. The whole thing dissolved into a court fight, and by the time a judge ruled, the team was already beyond saving.
Alta palannut Dinis ei tahdo sopeutua Euroopan kylmään talveen. Ensitesti Sauberin ratissa on kuitenkin lupaa.
HRT barely managed to be born at all. It was meant to be Spain's grand entrance into Formula One, and on paper it was Spain's first team to actually start a Grand Prix. In reality, it spent its entire existence in emergency mode. It arrived at its first race with a car that had barely been tested, it routinely failed crash tests, and in 2012 it couldn't even qualify within the rules in Australia. The owners shuffled. The team moved to Madrid, the talk got bigger, but the money never matched the ambition. When it was put up for sale at the end of 2012 and no buyer appeared before the deadline, HRT simply dropped off the entry list and was gone. It is the clearest example on this list of a team that spent nearly its whole life below the line of actually being ready to be a Formula One team. This team began in 2010 under Richard Branson's Virgin branding, designed entirely by computer with no wind tunnel, a philosophy pushed by, yes, Nick Worth, the same engineer whose Simtek had folded in 1995. That approach failed and was abandoned. The team became Marussia, and in 2014 it finally had its breakthrough. At Monaco, Jules Bianchi scored the team's first ever World Championship points, a result worth a fortune in prize money. And then, within months, Bianchi suffered the crash that would eventually take his life. The team went into administration, and it looked finished. But it came back, rescued, rebranded as Manor for 2015 and 2016, fighting on. The final blow came at the very end of 2016, when the team lost a single crucial position in the constructors' standings on the last lap of the season, which cost it the prize money it needed to survive. With no buyer in sight, the team was put into administration in January 2017, rather than start a season it might not finish. So, which team had the worst ending in Formula One history? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe.